What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 128, and I'm the co-host Kyle Anslone, joined by the co-host Will Porter. Will, how you doing today?
Doing great, Kyle. How you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. We got some cop stuff to talk about on today's show, but I think the most interesting story is about the Khashoggi and his murderers and where they were being trained. So, a lot of
Yeah.
great stuff on today's show. Making sure we're following through on stories like the Chauvin trial and like the Khashoggi murder. These are things that me and Will have been talking about for years, I guess, in the case of the Khashoggi murder. So,
Yeah.
a lot of great stuff. Especially our listeners, the faithful listeners, I think will really like today's show. So we'll tell people they could find the show at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show. That also includes the full archive of my news roundups. And then you can follow the show on Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. Donate to the show at Patreon or Subscribestar, and we post the videos up at YouTube and Odyssey. We're also posting the show on the blog at antiwar.com, so you can find
Yeah.
it there as well. And Will, before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde makes high quality CBD products. The URL for the site is palomaverdecbd.com. But if you forget that, just go to wherever you listen to the show, and we have either the URL or a direct link to the site right there on the page. So very easy to get to our sponsor's website. And once you're there, you have a enormous and great selection of high quality CBD products to pick from. They have things of every category, including products for your dog, soft gels. They have extracts. They have gummies, several different kinds of topicals. They blend their CBD with other, vitamins or minerals to make them more effective and to enhance the benefits. And well, I think you recently tried one of their new products, so tell us about that.
Yes, I did, and I like a lot of the stuff they have at Paloma. I like the gummies are great, the oil tinctures are great. But Carlos recently just sent me their new formulation of the melatonin soft gels, and those are awesome. Like those really pack a nice heavy punch. I have a hard time sleeping and winding down at night, and for me that really does help me pass out. So definitely, if you're interested, there's all kinds of educational resources, lab results you can find on the website. Definitely check that out, and definitely use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off your order.
All right. Now, well, let's get into the show, and we're starting off today with I don't know if it'll be the conclusion of our coverage on Chauvin, but it's, I guess, the conclusion of his original trial. Of course, he's the Minneapolis police officer that murdered George Floyd and, kicked off a summer of protest and rioting and all kinds of other stuff last year. But he was convicted a few months ago on 3 charges, including second and third degree murder and then a manslaughter charge. And we just got the sentence, Will. So I guess let's start off with what is the sentence, and then, there's a chance of appeal and everything like that. So I'm not saying this story is completely going away, but this is, the conclusion of, what's happened, assuming, he doesn't get an appeal.
Yeah, and we will get into some of that stuff too. The appeal, I think that's something we should discuss. But yeah, last Friday, Derek Chauvin was sentenced to I think 22 and a half years in prison. And right now, Derek Chauvin is 45 years old. So assuming he serves that whole sentence, which again he may not, we'll get into that in a second. But assuming he does, he would be 67 when he gets out. So this is less. This 22 and a half years. This is less than the 30 years that the prosecutors were seeking. I think Chauvin's own lawyers wanted just him to have probation, so clearly that's not what they wanted. But 22 years and some change will mean that he's going to get out an elderly man. Like he will spend the rest of his like middle age years behind bars. And I saw some places reporting this a couple different ways, but I saw some places writing about this as one of the longest sentences ever handed down for a cop who killed someone on duty. Now, some were qualifying that, saying that this is the longest sentence for a cop who killed a black person. I saw another one saying it's the longest sentence for a cop just in Minnesota. But I think either way, any of the above would make this, fairly significant. This is a decently long sentence, especially we're not talking about murder one here. We are talking about second and third degree, as well as a manslaughter charge. Now, well, actually, I'll let you jump in here before we get to the appeal stuff. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's about all I, had on that. I'd like to hear the appeal thing, and then we could get into the reaction.
Okay, sure, sure. Yeah, so Chauvin is expected to appeal this verdict and this sentence. I don't know exactly how successful he is going to be with that, but there was some stuff that happened during the trial in April that makes me think he might have some arguments. So I forget if I think we did mention this on the show, but there was one point back in April when Maxine Waters, the Democratic politician, she was going around doing like a PR tour of Minnesota, and she was kind of like urging people to be more confrontational with the police and protest hard if they don't give you the right verdict in the Chauvin case. And Chauvin's lawyers actually tried to have the judge declare a mistrial over that, saying that like Waters was like pressuring the jury, basically, that like indirectly threatening that if you guys don't give us the right verdict, then we're going to tear up the street and riot and stuff. And so the judge did ultimately refuse to declare a mistrial. However, he did say something that, like, I have a direct quote here. He said, "quote Congressman Waters may have given the defense something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned." And so that was one thing I noticed during the trial in April that kind of made me think, like, are we going to hear about this later? Is this going to be like the basis of their appeal, that politicians were getting involved and putting public pressure on the jurors and all this stuff? So this is something I would keep an eye on, at least. I don't know exactly how likely it is that they'll be successful with that, but I do think that Chauvin is expected to try this, and he's expected to try to appeal. So this might not be over. We do have the sentencing, but his case might not yet be done.
Yeah, and I'm guessing most people who get convicted of any homicide charge usually attempt an appeal or two. I mean,
Right.
people plead guilty, and there's other circumstances and stuff like that. But in a high-profile case like this, where Chauvin could probably raise some money for himself, I'm sure
Right.
that he still has some support among the Bat the Blue crowd. So he probably can raise money for an appeal, and I guess even if like an appeal gets granted, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to get out of jail. There's a lot of well-known innocent people that got an appeal and then continued to sit in jail for years and years before they finally got that conviction overturned and were let out. So
Right.
it seems that at this point, well, he is like in the prison system now and is a convicted murderer by all standards, and so I think it'll be a very long time before he ends up getting out, assuming like something crazy doesn't happen, like a Biden pardon or something like that, or the Nets president coming in and doing something really crazy. But that seems kind of unlikely, right? But that's the territory we're in for him getting out in a reasonable amount of time. Now, some
Right.
people seemed very content and felt I think that justice was done by the sentence. Other people on both sides of it, feeling like it was far too much or far too little. But well, I guess when I was listening to this, a lot of the people who felt like it was too little base it off of the idea that he's going to get out early, which
Right.
is hard for the judge, I think, to weigh in on that and to say I'm going to sentence Chauvin to 8 more years because I think he'll get out in
Right.
22 then rather than getting out in 14. I don't know if that should be the judge's ground. Now, these people could put pressure on the, prison system and the parole system to keep him in jail. That seems
Right.
plenty warranted. But I don't know if you had any real thoughts on if this feels like a sense of justice.
Well, yeah, I did certainly see and I don't know if this is the best way to judge. People on Twitter, it's maybe not the most like sincere reactions, but I did see some people kind of like mad about this, that Chauvin did not get the 30 years that was asked for by the prosecution. They were saying that this isn't a sense of justice. He should have gotten like throw the book at him basically. But I think you did say, didn't you mention? I think you mentioned this off air, that you saw some like visible reaction outside of the courthouse, right, when this was announced, the sentencing.
Yeah, there were a couple different news stations and independent media that were out there and just recording some of the reactions. And at least
Right.
again, this is just the people that were put on TV. So if somebody else has a bunch of footage that they could send me, I'm more than willing to watch it of people being all mad after. But largely, it seemed like the people outside the courtroom felt relieved. I don't know. Again, I don't want to say they felt like things are all squared away and justice has been all done, and
Right.
in a homicide case I don't think anybody ever feels that way. It's a high emotion thing, if somebody's life was taken. But then when I was getting into the mainstream media reaction, it seemed especially the liberal media, saying that this wasn't enough. Which, you know what, like I kind of get some of the argument, like it was a pretty brutal murder that we watched on that video, but considering that this guy is a cop in the United States, 22 years is a deterrent, right? This is something that I think, if a cop's kneeling on somebody's neck and the guy goes limp, that cop may get off them and try to get that person resuscitated just to make sure that he doesn't go to jail for 22 years. Like, right. This does seem to like convey the right, not that this is fixing policing in the U.S. or anything like that, but this is enough of a sentence that's natural. It's not a slap on the wrist. You can't call it a slap on the wrist, and I think that's right. Significant. And I don't know how long to lock somebody up in jail for, especially in the United States where the jail system is so inhumane. Yeah. But at the same time, this is a murdering cop, and I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for him. So hopefully he does the whole sentence, and when he gets out, he's just an irrelevant old man who doesn't. It is probably not going to have the physical power to do this to another person once he gets out of jail. And we should all take some comfort in that. So, Will, anything else on Chauvin? And of course, if we do start getting into appeals, especially if they look like they're meaningful, if it's just a meaningless appeal from Chauvin, I don't know if we'll cover it. But if it's a real substantive thing, we'll definitely dig into it.
Yeah, I would just say, I think you're right. You and I often call for police accountability, that we want to see officers face some kind of consequence when they do things like this. And, I guess we could, split hairs about exactly what sentence this guy should have got. Should he have gotten the full 30 years? But I absolutely agree with you. Two decades and some change, I think, is a deterrent. And it might make some cops think twice before they do something like this. So I agree with that.
Right. Especially if it happens more frequently.
Right. But I think our next thing we wanted to get in here, there was a shooting actually out in your neck of the woods. This guy, this man, Ronald Troik, that drove up to a busy commercial area in Arvada, Colorado, and shot a cop, Gordon Beasley. So, do you have the details on what happened there and what followed?
Well, I mean, to the extent that we know him, Will, I am going to play a little bit of the footage here for people watching, and this is about the only minute of footage that the police have released. Arvada is one of the few police departments in the U.S. that has really been resisting body cameras. If anybody watching could see the shooter get out of his truck with a weapon, and I don't know to what extent you could see the murder happen, but you could see that he fires his weapon, and then retreats to his truck. And we definitely don't have the video of the interaction between Hurley and the police officers that ended up with Hurley being killed. But we don't even know if we have Hurley at all in this video, as far as I could tell. There are, several people in this video who are unidentified, and so it's possible that he's one of these bystanders, but we don't know. So details on this, Will, are really slim coming out so far. The general story that we know is the shooter went and was targeting police and killed one police officer. We have witnesses inside the restaurant that Hurley was in saying that, he instantly reacted. He grabbed his gun. He went out there, and then this guy who was going to go on a rampage, killing, possibly regular people too, but definitely any police he saw, and Hurley, took him out. One of the things that's very unclear, Will, is exactly what happened. It's possible that Hurley shot the guy somewhere where he bled out over the course of, several, an hour or so, in which case, how Hurley then reacts to the shooter. Maybe he has his gun trained on him when the police come because the shooter is still alive at the time. You want to make sure he doesn't grab his gun and shoot you or something like that. At the same time, the guy could have been dead. I saw a report that Hurley possibly picked up the guy. For anybody who watched the video, he had a rifle. It's been identified as an AR-15. I don't know if the person who identified it as an AR-15 actually meant it or just, saw a rifle that was black and long and decided it was an AR-15. So there's a lot of details, and I don't want to say anything about this that we don't know to be true. But something happened, and police responded on the scene and then killed Hurley. Now, the reason, well, I want to talk about this story is because, as Thaddeus Russell said on Twitter, he's one of ours. He actually was apparently a freak. I don't know if we and him attended the same event at all. I've only been in Denver a couple months now, but there's a Liberty on the Rocks group out here that's it's a really great group of guys and girls there, and I have a lot of fun whenever I go. And he was apparently a regular at those. I actually spoke at one of the events, and so he's kind of a part of that community. And everybody who's a part of that community is like, yeah, John was absolutely a great guy. And so since there's really no coverage of his death at all, I think we should spend some time and talk about this and follow it forward, and hopefully we could have some accountability for the Varda police department that killed Hurley. And so what happened? They don't have body cameras. They're not releasing the footage. We got stay on this story and make sure the truth comes out, because I think everybody would agree that in the Chauvin case, if people hadn't had that 9-minute video and that hadn't come out, it's very possible that they would chalk this up as a fentanyl death and Chauvin would still be a police officer today. And so, talk about this, get pressure about this. I think there's going to be some local activities going on, and if there are, I'm going to do my best to make a few of them to, try to, again, put some pressure on the police department. Hopefully we can find out the truth here. Will, are you aware of any other details that I missed? Again, I didn't really want to a lot of it is just speculation. There's not been a real accounting from the police department. They have showered Hurley with praise, despite the fact that he was a hardcore libertarian. This guy was no fan of the cops. And so somebody pointed this out on Twitter. The person who pointed out, I think, was kind of unfair to John and her characterizing him as an extremist, but she kind of called him a right-wing extremist, and an anti-cop guy goes out and kills a mass shooter who's anti-cop and out to kill cops, and then the cops come and kill the guy who saved probably the lives of several police officers. And there's just some really dark, twisted irony in all of that. And if the police really cared about their own lives, and Hurley saving them, you would think they would actually try to do his memory some justice by trying to find out who killed him and why, and holding that person accountable if they need to be held accountable, which it really seems like they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of like the details of what happened, I believe it is the police's account that Hurley had walked up and picked up the gunman's AR-15 or whatever rifle it was, that apparently he was disarming him, trying to get the gun away from him. And I believe it was then that the cop, rounded a corner or something and killed him. I guess presumably believing that Hurley himself was the shooter, I guess. But it seems sort of like the cop just sort of, shot first and asked questions later, which, sort of, I guess it's understandable in an active shooter situation. I don't want to just like 100% say, oh, he murdered Hurley. But I do hope that, if they review this and find the cop did, wrongly use force, then that, he would face some consequences, as with any cop. I think right now he is on leave. They put him on administrative leave. They haven't, I don't think, identified the cop who was actually behind the shooting Hurley. The cop who was killed was named Gordon Beasley, the guy who you can see in the video. So, and I believe at the end of this, there were 3 people ultimately who were killed. It was the police officer Beasley, it was John Hurley, the libertarian heroic bystander, as well as the shooter, Troik. And there's very little known about this Troik guy. I haven't seen almost anything reported about him, other than the fact that he's 59 years old. And apparently he left some kind of threatening note toward the police. But the way that was reported was kind of murky. Like it kind of made it sound like he left it at his house or something. That like somebody had discovered this note and sent it to the police, rather than them finding it like in his car or on the scene or something, directly saying, here's what I'm doing. So I don't know. I would like to hear more details about that guy and like what, maybe he had some social media history or something, to see if he had some, declared his intention to go shoot people.
Right.
But that's about all I have. I know that Hurley, I think he was lived in Denver. I think he was 40 years old. There's a lot of very like celebratory media coverage. You can go read some eyewitnesses saying that like this is the most heroic thing I've ever witnessed in my life, like actually seen firsthand. It was this dude just getting his gun and running directly toward danger, and he succeeded. He stopped it. He neutralized the threat, you might say. So that's Interesting story.
Yeah, definitely. And well, I would just add that if any regular citizen with they're at the shooter in place. So if Hurley had rounded the corner and a cop was standing there with a gun and he shot a cop, even if it was a plainclothes police officer,
That's
he would
right.
be in jail right now. Absolutely no question. Maybe it wouldn't be a
100%.
first degree murder charge. Maybe why there's a difference between I'm trying to kill this person and I made a mistake. That's understandable, but at the same time, the cops should be held to the same standard, or
Yeah.
else you're going to have this situation occur again and again where cops show up on the scene and just shoot whoever has a gun. I mean, Will, imagine you're sitting there, even if you're not armed, right? But you grab the guy's gun and take it from him or something, and then the cops come and kill you. It
Right.
would be, like the cops can't respond that way. They have to like be able to assess the situation. Now, we all know there's no video out yet, but the cops haven't made the statement. And my guess is they wouldn't have called him a hero so many times if Hurley had pointed the gun at the police officer. But
Oh, 100%.
but at the same time, like this is a situation where he just killed somebody who was an active shooter. So if for whatever reason, like his instincts, like kind of kicked in and he grabbed the gun, put it, in the ready position on his shoulder and turned towards the cop, then that is it's tougher to call that cop a murderer because the cop
Right.
just knows there's an active shooter on the scene and now a guy's pointing a gun at him. So,
Yeah.
it could get the lines could get blurry at some point, but unless if the police officers had on body cameras, this wouldn't be so much of an issue. And the
Right.
police release the footage. That's a point to point out that body cameras just aren't a solution. Body cameras with transparency with body camera footage are the solution.
Yeah, yeah, and two other things actually, two last things. Apparently, this police department is supposed to start using body cameras soon. I think there was a law passed last year because of the George Floyd stuff, those protests. I think they are supposed to, use body cams soon, but it doesn't really help for this case when there's no footage whatsoever. But I think the last thing to say ended on a good note, because it's a pretty sad story. Three people are dead, two of them not horrible aggressors. But there was a GoFundMe set up for Johnny Hurley, and the last I checked, it had raised nearly $60,000 for his family. So I thought that was a silver lining to a tragic kind of story.
Right. Yeah. A community did come together for him to, try to help his family. Pick up the pieces there.
Yeah,
Will, let's talk about this Khashoggi thing.
yeah,
So Jamal Khashoggi was a Washington Post reporter who was killed by a Saudi hit team in the Istanbul consulate. What was it? October of 2018, I believe.
yes, correct.
Um, Later it comes out and there's pretty clear evidence that not only did they kill him, but then they dismembered his body. They tried to put somebody else in his clothes and have him walk outside. It didn't work because Khashoggi's fiance was there, so he can't go get in the car and then go elope with her like I think they were planning on doing, which causes a lot of problems for the whole Saudi plot here. Khashoggi was, while not, I would say, like an anti-war guy by any means, was not a fan of Mohammed bin Salman and the ruling coalition in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
So, when people call him a dissident, sometimes people think, oh, a dissident was killed. This guy must have been like some kind of real crusader. I don't know. He was a Washington Post reporter, but at the same time, this certainly was a absolutely brutal killing and very bold. The Washington Post, it's a U.S. newspaper. You're killing a journalist who works for the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos.
right.
That's somewhat significant, and so this kind of does blow up in Mohammed bin Salman's face. I mean, not really, because even Joe Biden won't go to sanctioning him, even though it's almost worse, right? That at least Trump kind of denied that he did it, or he tried to brush it aside and not make a big deal out of it. Where Biden's
Right.
like, yeah, he did it, and we're gonna hold him accountable, but I'm not gonna hold him accountable.
Yeah,
So we have this situation now, Will, where we know essentially the story. That it's pretty confirmed that he was killed by the Saudi hit team. The Saudis have arrested, convicted, and not pardoned a couple members of the hit team, I believe. I think most of the people have kind of gotten away. I don't want to say with a slap on the wrist because that might be like a knife on the wrist in Saudi Arabia and you're walking around without a hand, which is a little bit more serious. But it seems for the most part that the murderers and especially the ringleader Mohammed bin Salman have gotten away with this. And now we learn out these pretty shocking details that a couple of the members of the hit squad were actually trained in the US. So, Will, do we know this for sure because it is coming from the mainstream media, and then what's happening here?
Yeah, so this was something I was surprised to find. This was actually previously reported, but it was kind of buried. It never really like made much of the rounds in the news cycle. But the last week, the New York Times was able to corroborate this much more, and their headline kind of says it all. That quote, Saudi operatives who killed Khashoggi received paramilitary training in the U.S. Um, we all recall that there was this hit squad that murdered Khashoggi in the consulate in Turkey. And four members of that team had actually traveled to the United States between 2014 and 2019 to receive this paramilitary training from this private security contractor called the Tier 1 Group. And this had to be approved and authorized by the State Department, and it was. And this company says the training was more focused on like marksmanship and some basic like military tactics. But the Times also talked to some sources who said there were also some like surveillance and intelligence related stuff in there too that conceivably might be useful for what they later did to Khashoggi. And this was all happening. Some of this training was happening while MBS, or Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, had started this major crackdown. He tried to consolidate power by arresting a bunch of royals and other influential people, including Khashoggi's own good friend, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. Also got arrested. He's like a billionaire who ended up locked up in a hotel, I think. So kind of a bad time for these thugs to be coming here to get training to potentially participate in such a crackdown, but they did. And the WAPO actually had originally reported on this back in 2019. Like this has been out for a couple of years now, but it was buried in this column by David Ignatius. Like I don't even know if they did a regular news write-up where like this actually appears in the headline that like these guys received training. But Ignatius actually did have a decent amount of details even back then. But back then he was just citing a lot of like anonymous sources and people, his connections and contacts. But the Times now has actually got a hold of previously unreleased testimony from the guy who owns the parent company of the security firm that trained these guys. And this guy's named Louis Bramer. And Bramer was actually nominated for a Pentagon job under Trump. And while he was testifying during that nomination process, they have to go and like answer questions before lawmakers. A couple of congressmen were apparently hip to this training. They were aware that these Saudis had come here for this. I think they were trained in Alabama. And he was asked about this by the lawmakers during this testimony. And his nomination, though, was later withdrawn. And that testimony never saw the light of day until last week when the Times actually got it and published it. So that is where this is all coming from. And I would call that a fairly solid confirmation that this training did happen. Like this is straight from the guy who owns the parent company. Now, of course, this Bramer guy maintains that this training had nothing to do with what happened to Khashoggi later. He says this was like sort of a coincidence that these four guys just happened to be involved in this training. But, I don't know if that's true. I don't know how coincidental it is. But either way, I think like this does kind of just highlight like it's a bad idea to get into bed with these like very autocratic authoritarian dictatorships like Saudi Arabia. Where women are legally subhuman and there's no legislature. Like this kind of stuff is bound to happen if you're training up their like paramilitary forces. And not only did these four specific Saudis get training that might have helped them, assassinate a journalist, but the U.S. has also done other joint training programs for Saudi intelligence people. And like God knows how those skills have been used around the world. Ignatius actually wrote about one particular program that was run through DynCorp, this private company. And until last year, they were owned by a parent company called Cerberus Capital Management. And Cerberus also just happens to be the parent company of Tier 1 Group, the group that trained the Khashoggi killers, the four Khashoggi killers. And then who was the major Saudi contact on that DynCorp, that other training program? Well, of course, it was Major General Ahmed al-Asiri, who was like one of the main plotters of the Khashoggi hit. And he was like the highest level guy to actually stand trial. He was later acquitted, of course, but the U.S. still has sanctions on him for his alleged role in the murder. I think he's one of the highest level people to be sanctioned. So anyway, that's about all I have. Like a lot of this stuff seems to be related, seems kind of fishy. But bottom line here, it seems confirmed that the government authorized training for these four Saudis who later helped to murder Jamal Khashoggi.
Right. And well, as you say, this isn't just an isolated thing that Saudi Arabia is committing war crimes around the world, and
Yeah.
that if we're training them, there's a possibility that they're going to be involved in something like this, and it's a reason not to do it. Another reason, of course, is what happened in Pensacola, Florida, where they were
Yeah.
training Saudis, and one of them shot up a barracks there. Now, the other thing I'll point out, Will, is just it wasn't that long ago that Turkey actually, it seems, carried out an extraordinary rendition of the nephew of Fatah Gulen, who, not Fatah, I don't know how to say his first name, but Gulen,
That's
who
close.
was the alleged coup plotter. He lives in Pennsylvania, but Turkey has been seeking his extradition since 2016, when the president there claims that he was behind a coup plot. And so his nephew, who was apparently living in Kenya, it was announced like 3 or 4 weeks ago that he had shown up arrested by the Turkish CIA. So that was very interesting. It's also interesting that happened roughly at the same time that the flight was downed in Belarus and the blogger was arrested
Yep.
there, and that this didn't get talked about. And while it's not quite the same incident to like kidnap somebody in a country as to down an
Right.
airplane. It seems like these things happen, and I'm sure we could find the U.S. Trains and cooperates with the Turkish intelligence authority pretty frequently as well. Will,
Right.
anything else on this other than just another tie of how the U.S. deep state and war machine just made so much money doing so many terrible things and helping so many really bad people.
Yeah, and I mean it's all with the knowledge too of the U.S. State Department. They have to give their blessings for this. So like the military industrial complex itself, the private element of that is bad enough that they're willing to offer all these services, but it always has to be with the complicity and the agreement and the authorization of the empire, the state.
Right. Well, and as you point out, the congressman found out about this at a hear. Well, they knew about it before, but then they brought it up at this hearing. You would think it would be something that would maybe prompt a review or put in some new background checks or something in the process of, are we going to bring these people to our country to train?
Right.
Because if they're willing to kill an American journalist in a foreign country's consulate, I don't see any reason why bringing them to Alabama, they won't try to carry out some kind of assassination in the United States. It's really not that much more brazen than to do it in the Turkish consulate, it seems. So,
No. Yeah, absolutely. For the Saudis, it seems like they think the world is their oyster, that they can
right.
do whatever they want, wherever they want. So, yeah, I wouldn't put it past them.
And hell, I mean, at least Erdogan is like kind of independent, and I think he probably has like a "you can't tell me what to do" attitude. And
Right.
so, if it was in an American consulate and we had like the footage, it'd probably get covered up, where he dripped it out, like he ran the political playbook on that one to make sure that Mohammed bin Salman tied the noose and hung himself with it,
That's
even the
right.
way they released that story. But Will, should we move on here?
Yeah, yeah. I think our next slot, we wanted to talk about some North Korea stuff that happened last week. So I know that one thing that I've noticed about the Biden administration, I think we've kind of hit on this in the show a little bit, is just the lack of focus on North Korea. Like we haven't really heard much from the administration on this issue. Heard a little bit about like sort of their general approach, but it seems Biden's not really eager to make moves one way or another on this. I think they kind of want to put this one on the back burner. But last week we did actually have some of like, some uncommon or rare back and forth between some high level officials. So, and I don't think we've seen much of that in the first 6 months now of Biden's term. So, what were both sides saying?
So I guess I wanted to start with this morning. I went and Googled North Korea because I was just looking for some good columns to have displayed while we record our show here.
Yeah.
And the top stories overall weren't this back and forth about the possible talks between the U.S. and North Korea. No, the top story on every Google search was, guess what? North Korea's leader, Kim Jong Un, lost some weight, Will. I guess I shouldn't say some. He lost, like, it looks to be, I don't know, 20 or 30 pounds. He's kind of a short guy, so it might be a little bit less. He certainly looks good. In the thing, they're talking about how his wristwatch looks like it's tightened a little bit more, and where it used to be tighter on his wrist and is now wearing loose. They're talking about this one comment made on North Korea's state media, where somebody made it sound like they were concerned about his health because of his weight. I mean, it's absolutely crazy, Will. Whenever, he's overweight, they freak out and they're like, oh my God, Kim Jong-un's overweight. This shows instability in North Korea. And now that he's losing weight, this is also a huge deal. Now, it doesn't look to me, Will, that he lost enough weight that it would be an obvious sign of some kind. Some people going through chemo lose a ton of weight. Like that would be a possibility. He doesn't look that thin. He still looks like he's got a healthy amount of weight on him. And, if he's on a diet, he's probably got a few pounds still to go to hit his weight. But he is the leader of a country. And, if you went probably 5 or 6 pages deep on the Google News section there, you could find that there's actually increasing concern in North Korea about food scarcity. And I guess with the crackdowns that they've had over the past year trying to keep COVID out, they're in the U.S. sanctions and the fact that it's a communist, poorly run country that's, centered on the military, and they poured a lot of money into, military and everything like that. For a lot of reasons, the North Korean people are starving. And so I was thinking, well, that this might be a little bit of a PR move. Look, the guy's getting older. He's probably more mature. He probably realizes that if he's plump and everybody is starving to death, it looks worse. And so if he could, not even if he's thick, and not fat, that probably makes it just a little bit better of a PR game. It's part of what I was thinking here, but I didn't hear any speculation. That was all about his health and how this makes him look weak, apparently. So that's what the media is focusing on, and that's probably why we really don't have any progress on North Korea, is because every time they talk about it, Will, it's just about this cult of personality around Kim Jong-un and possibly his sister now, who they kind of fawn over in a weird way. Yeah, I remember in like 2016, they were talking, or 2017, the possibility of North Korea having a female leader before the United States because Trump got let over Hillary. And it's just like, I don't think you understand this, lady, and how that's really not a good thing. But so there was a statement made by North Korea. I believe it was a statement made by Kim Jong-un that kind of got this whole thing kicked off, where he said that the U.S. really has the choice between dialogue or confrontation with North Korea. Now, then the U.S. Envoy to North Korea, who I believe is doing double duty as the envoy to Malaysia as well. So it's not like a situation where this guy, it seems like Biden is really concerned, enough with the North Korea to appoint an own envoy to this situation, even though, they're trying to get rid of nuclear weapons there. But the envoy said that, the U.S. would talk to North Korea anytime, anywhere, which, well, 2 positive statements seem to come out in a row. And then North Korea clarifies, saying that, we're not willing to talk to the United States with their current position, a position of hostilities. And, the NSA Jade Sullivan just kind of trivialized the comments made by Kim Jong-un as an interesting signal. Later, the U.S. clarified that, they're still looking for the North Koreans to commit to denuclearization before talks, and a lot of senior officials in North Korea said that there wouldn't be any kind of talks or dialogue between the two countries. Now, all of this sounds like there's a lot of hate being thrown around, but that doesn't necessarily mean, Will, that behind the scenes that there's not something going on, talks going on between the two or something like that. Right. It indicates that things are going poorly, but I don't know. Sometimes when there's loud talk going on between the two countries, that's actually because there is some, bad channel communications going on. But from the reports that I've seen from the Biden administration, how they plan to handle North Korea, it doesn't seem like they're going to divert from the Obama policy, which is just going to be to do nothing. Now, it'll be interesting to see how long North Korea is kind of content with that being the case. I think if the Biden administration would be very happy if they spent 4 years. North Korea doesn't conduct any major nuclear tests, just kind of sits quietly while they're sanctioned. We prevent the South Koreans from carrying out any kind of meaningful, like, bipartisan or country dialogues between the two states. And, he's able to hand this problem off to his predecessor, with North Korea having like 10 to 15 more nuclear weapons in the amount in those 4 years. But I don't know. That's about where I'm seeing it. I don't think this is any sign that anything is actually going on, but was interesting to see a bubble up in the news and generate some headlines in the United States, because it really hasn't during his administration. There's like kind of 5 or 6 international issues that I feel like have surprisingly been left on the back burner. Places where Trump has taken the country to a more hostile position. I guess that, waffle back and forth with North Korea. But, Cuba, Venezuela, where Biden doesn't even seem to want to bother or look at it and just kind of deal with other stuff.
Right. Yeah, maybe more focused on his domestic stuff.
Getting everybody a jab.
Right. That definitely, yeah, all the COVID stuff for sure. But I know that the administration hasn't said much about North Korea since Biden took office, but I know they have put forward sort of this general approach, saying they want to try to like walk the line between Obama and Trump. Obama's strategic patience thing, which is just doing nothing, like you said. And then Trump, they called it a grand bargain strategy, which they kind of tried to portray it like Trump was just going for all or nothing. And, that was his approach. And I think that really is unfortunate, because I think that misses a lot of lessons of what they could draw from Trump's diplomatic efforts in North Korea that we've covered a lot here. Trump did make a lot of progress on the issue. They had the whole freeze for freeze idea, which freeze for freeze to me doesn't seem like all or nothing. That seems like a very calculated, incremental kind of approach. However, I think, John Bolton, the national security advisor at the time, he kind of did end up taking over the negotiations. He did kind of make that all or nothing, give up all your nuclear weapons and then we'll consider, giving up some sanctions. But it's unfortunate, though, that they're just dismissing Trump's thing as a grand bargain strategy, because I think they could draw a lot of lessons from the things that did work under him. But it does seem like they just want to replicate the whole strategic patience, do nothing, sit on your hands for 4 years kind of deal.
Yeah, I think the whole that they're trying to walk the line between the two is PR spin.
Yes.
I don't know why the media teed it up for them so much. It's absolutely absurd. But when they came out with this policy that they're going to walk the line, the media absolutely ate it up and just reported that that's what they were doing. When there's really no light between the Obama and the Biden policies. And as you're saying, there really any light that was shown during the Trump administration. And look, John Bolton slammed that door pretty hard in Hanoi, and so that's was right. A real disappointment. But anything that was maybe opened up by Trump's trip to the DMZ, or just the fact that the U.S. seemed like maybe something like there was some independent thought in Washington, even if it wasn't necessarily the right kind of thoughts, the fact that somebody was thinking of doing something different was probably enough for them to, look into it and be open. But it doesn't seem like Biden is interested in at all. And again, I think his hope would be that this doesn't become an issue in, the 3.5 years he has to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about Syria. Will, it's been a while. I believe there's still U.S. troops there. I think the war is still going on. No, I know it's still going on. And the Syrian government's trying to deal with the Islamic State in their territory. The U.S. claims they're still carrying out operations against the Islamic State. So what's all going on?
Yeah, so I would say Syria is another issue, kind of like North Korea, that's just been on the back burner. Like, we haven't really heard much from the administration on this. It was a major issue under Obama, where we were heavily involved in backing rebel groups, trying to overthrow the government. With Trump, it was a little less important, though we did still hear about it from time to time. He often spoke of wanting to withdraw the I think at the time it was like 2,000 troops, I think, in 2017 when he took over. And apparently even ordered that at one point, the withdrawal of troops, but was overruled by his own inferiors. If you'll recall, when Trump's Syria envoy, Jim Jeffrey, said that, that they just lied to the White House about the troop levels there. They played shell games. Well, now with Biden, like, they have said they would do a policy review for Syria, as they've said with many issues. But beyond that, we have heard almost nothing about this. And so that, to me, that makes we got a few comments last week from a senior State Department person, and I think that makes that a little more significant, because we have not heard much about this issue in the first 6 months here. And so This guy, Joey Hood, he is the acting assistant secretary for the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. He and a few other officials gave a telebriefing, a press briefing, because Tony Blinken is supposed to go overseas soon to hold some meetings that will focus on Syria. And so they were kind of like previewing that in this briefing. And Hood made it very clear during this that Biden has no intention of withdrawing troops from Syria. He said they would keep a limited presence up in the northeastern Kurdish areas, and that he said their sole purpose would be to defeat the Islamic State. And he actually did not mention anything about the southern garrison we hold near Al-Tanf in the more Arab area. He just mentioned the sort of northeastern Kurdish areas, and of course, no journalist asked him about the Al-Tanf garrison and whether we would stay there. So it's not really clear what's happening with that. Now, in terms of the rationale for this, saying that we're going to stay in northeastern Syria to defeat the Islamic State, well, the Islamic State isn't really a state anymore by any definition of that term. I mean, the administration even often talks about their territorial defeat, but they do still exist as some kind of insurgent group, and they do carry out attacks from time to time. And so that, I guess, is going to be the perpetual permanent justification to just stay in Syria forever, and that Biden is apparently cashing in on this ISIS thing, which is a bit odd given how much like it was been touted that they've been defeated. Like it wasn't just Trump who said they were defeated. It was all the military leaders. It was a bunch of people. But nonetheless, this is the rationale to stay, to fight the Islamic State. And so to me, that was the main thing about this briefing, is that they confirmed that they have no intention of pulling the troops out. But there were a couple other interesting things there too. One, there was no mention of working with the Syrian government or the Russians at all. They had said that they have no intention to engage with them. Instead, they only talked about how they would work with what's called the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is this Kurdish proxy group we've been backing for years now. But no talk of working with Damascus to try to figure out some of these humanitarian things. It's funny, he did mention the difficulty of getting humanitarian aid to Syrians, but didn't mention the massive like crippling blockade and sanctions the U.S. has on Syria and how that might play into the difficulty, the humanitarian issues. No journalist asked a single thing about that. One journalist did ask, did their job and asked how many troops we actually still have in Syria. But the officials refused to stay. They just said that, and no one really tried to press them on that. They just said, oh, yeah, we'll have to get back to you. But that was never made clear. Under Trump, he was supposed to pull out initially 2,000 and reduce it down to like 200. As I said, that did not happen. And the latest numbers that I've seen now are like just shy of 1,000. It's like 900 or something, I guess, that are still there between the Kurdish areas in the north and the area in the south. So that's basically what what was said during this briefing. The main takeaway is that they are not withdrawing troops. They intend to keep them stationed in Syria for indefinitely, I guess.
Well, that's really something, Will, that we end up occupying Syria without not even authorization for use of military force, much less a declaration of war. In fact, when Obama wanted to do this, he very specifically decided not to seek the authorization in Congress because it wasn't going to go through. There were several Congress members of Congress at the time who said that they never got more phone calls than they got against the Syria intervention. And so yet somehow 9 years later, Will, here we are talking about these U.S. forces with American flags on the back of their Humvees still occupying Syria. It's an absolute mess. It's a wreck on the Syrian people. Is there anything else that's happening in Syria that's worth noting? As far as I could tell, it seems like the Syrian government is still working on retaking the Idlib province that Russia is still supporting with airstrikes, but it's definitely not as high a pace, or it seems like the Syrian government is trying in earnest as they were like in other areas of Syria to retake this territory. It seems like they're kind of slowly retaking some of these areas. They're mainly held by these HTS Al-Qaeda linked groups, although Turkey has a lot of observation posts in the area, so I'm sure that plays a part of it, that there are Turkish troops also occupying a part of Syria. And then of course you still have the areas that are more in dispute between Turkey and the Kurds, between even the Syrian government at this point. So there's still a lot of issues left to be resolved here, Will, but anything else?
No, I mean, I think you summarize a lot of the issues very well. Like there is sort of this slow grind in Idlib trying to get it back from these like jihadist groups. It's honestly taken longer than I expected. I thought they would do some big offensive or something and take that stuff back. But remember, Idlib, they did spend a long, like I think even years, getting these rebel groups to surrender in other parts of Syria and having them go and consolidate in Idlib. So this is a very long project in the making, and maybe they don't just want to, go and start carpet bombing the place after all those reconciliation deals and stuff. So, yeah, slow process for sure.
Right, and very complicated. I mean, there's a lot of Al Qaeda fighters there, and so if you're the Syrian government and Turkey's occupying that territory, maybe it's kind of better to take it back very slowly and make sure you don't end up with any of those people on your side of the borders and territory there. Well, thanks for doing this one. I think we got another great show for everyone. Will tell people where to find you on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, the best place probably where I collect all my work is just my Twitter handle. Go at the Will Porter. I'm a staff writer at RT. I usually post the stuff I write there. Yeah, that's the one-stop shop.
All right, and then follow the show on Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. The Twitter handle is at @con_interest. Check out the Libertarian Institute for a full archive of the show. Subscribe on YouTube or Odyssey for the video versions. And if you got a couple extra bucks and could help me and Will out, you can either get yourself some great CBD products and use the promo code PEACE when you check out, or you could set up a recurring donation on Patreon or Subscribestar. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Kyle. Bye, everybody.